And that was the Callisto Protocol. So, altogether, it's an acceptable game. Performance-wise, if you overlook the bad performance of the game, it's not. It's just a slightly worse. Well, Dead Space. That's what it is. A slightly worse Dead Space. And the big problems was, of course, the lack of enemy variety, which you'd think with the mutation mechanics and the whole plot, they could have made up for more interesting mutations and different things the mutations could have had. I mean, that's what Resident Evil 4 had with like scythe arms and scythe heads and stuff like that, but I didn't bother doing that. The combat was very hit and miss because it was very sort of you either cheesed it or you got clapped. And when you had to deal with the larger hordes, the most effective way of fighting was not fighting and cheesing kinesis or cheesing the environment. And as you saw on the most harder parts of the horde system, I just don't think the combat system is useful enough or is fluid enough to work in larger groups. And so in consequence, you can't actually have those large Dead Space sort of combat moments because the combat just isn't designed to have that, and that's why on the larger horde sort of moments in the campaign, you're mostly just throwing people off of rail carts or you're throwing them into walls because the game is not, the combat is not designed to be for larger engagements with more than sort of one opponent. And that would be fine if you could have one-on-one or two-on-one opponents, as long as the opponents are quite a challenge, which normally they were, but the lack of enemy variety does mean it became rather predictable who to deal with and how to fight, and the lack of bosses and also the shallowness of the levels is really what sort of let the game down. And that means that really it's very, very underwhelming. Like the levels, they could have done so much more of the levels. They could have done some more about the prison part of the game, perhaps before the outbreak, to see how cruel and pleasant was. They could have done more to demonstrate the extent of the experimentations and and presented some horrific experiments. They could have had some sort of psychotic inmates and a battle between the inmates and the crew and yourself. They could have, of course, had done a lot more about sort of mutations. So in that sort of water sewage part, they could have had a mutated human-fish hybrid. In the winter part, they could have had a mutated sort of furry, sort of shaggy head mutant that acts more like sort of a polar bear, wildebeest. Like they could have done a whole lot more of the whole mutation stick rather than pale skin, a fungi-looking, stretchy Play-Doh. That's really what it was, and that's another sort of underwhelming part. The good parts of the game, of course, was the storyline itself, which was pretty good. I did enjoy the storyline and the setting. I also did enjoy the combat when it worked, and I did enjoy the visceralness of the combat, and it felt that we really were causing a lot of damage when you were using your weapons on an enemy. The death animations were, of course, very rewarding, and I didn't really feel it got too repetitive until I started dying a lot towards the end. And I did like the uniqueness of the combat. It didn't perform very well. They took a risk trying to put the combat through and innovating with that sort of combat. If they build upon it, it has a chance, but I liked how it was different from what I'm used to. It wasn't more of the same. But altogether, it is a good game for the current generation. As you've known with most games of the current generation, they're all a bit garbage, second rate, unfinished, unmade, DLC fest pieces of garbage, which are shallow, short, and generally lacking in any sort of creativity whatsoever. But that means it comes out ahead of its peers. And in the Kingdom of the Blind, the one-eyed man is king, and this game is very much one-eyed compared to the other AAA garbage that is out there. However, if you compared it to games that are much older, and that such as Dead Space, which I constantly did, or Dead Space 2 or Resident Evil, it would come out badly. It would come out as mediocre. So it just demonstrates to you really how much a game success can be dependent on how bad other games are when it is released, and in this case this game will be successful because not because it's particularly cutting edge or new, or well, not because it's particularly cutting edge, but because the other games around it are just so bad. And this means that this game is a solid, really, 7 out of 10, 7.5 out of 10. Unfortunately, it is what it is. I can't do much about it. I wish I could change it, but it's but performance-wise is also bad. Another more of the story there is honestly, do not put graphics before gameplay. All you've done by making this unoptimized, pretty-looking game is made the game unpleasant to play, and I'd rather have a step back from graphics and graphics quality if it meant the gameplay was more seamless and more enjoyable. And the fact that it was released really with bad performance on the PC was embarrassingly bad. It shouldn't have happened. Shouldn't have been done. They should have delayed it by a day, and they should not have let that happen. Anything else? Honestly, all you've done by increasing the graphics is you've increased the price of admission to play your game, or it added nothing. The new graphics, it didn't really do much more. All you did was make it so you needed 3080 just to get a decent performance. You needed 4080 to get a decent performance. Even then, those machines were struggling, or those graphics cards were struggling. So again, it's a good sort of allegory for not putting gameplay after graphics. I mean, the graphics were good, but there was nothing to scream about. The graphics weren't good enough to justify the awful performance of this game on PC. Again, I've got a 2080 Super, 2.3 gigahertz i7 processor. I think I've got something higher than that. The issue wasn't my machine. The issue is that my machine was having to allocate so much resources to things such as the DRM, to the Nouveau, the graphics itself, that it just meant that eventually my machine would overheat. So my machine could play it, but then it would get to a bottleneck stage, and as you saw of those freezes and that, it got to a bottleneck stage. Of course, as soon as I changed some options around, that disappeared, and that's because the game isn't optimized. It's not optimized to get the most out of your machines, and I suspect, again, I blame the DRM for that as well. I've had the same issue on Elden Ring when they had that sort of anti-cheat sort of DRM thing added, and I had this exact same issue. Game ran seamlessly, then you'd have massive bottlenecks because it was using a lot of resources. In any case, it's an okay game. It's an okay game. It's enjoyable. I wouldn't replay it though, unless I played more DLC for the lore and the setting, but I wouldn't replay this game because it's got no real replayability. You don't replay it to get, oh, I'll try a different weapon, or I'll try upgrading this fully. You would only replay this for, I mean, you replayed Dead Space 2 because it was fun. I wouldn't replay this. I played this for the experience. I didn't really play this because I enjoy playing it. There was moments where I did enjoy it, but overall, it would be a chore to play from start to finish again. So, in consequence, it's a good game for the current generation, but overshadowed by games decades older than itself. Still, it is promising. I do think there is opportunity here to advance and develop off of what they've made. It's very easy to complain about games willy-nilly and always be a doomer, but I think altogether it's a healthy start. It just needs more to it. It needs more heart to it. It needs more of that little bit of lore everywhere. It needs more of that sort of building up the plot around places, more of that environmental storytelling. Just needs a bit more, and then you should be good, and the game should be good.